Are you too busy? Too stressed out? Unhealthy? Then this is the place for you. Welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, where we help you create wellness and balance with a holistic approach that will work for you, even with the busiest of schedules, so you can live the life you want. And now, here's your host, Diane Randall.
Hello, everyone. I'm Diane Randall, your host. Welcome to the show that teaches the best inner tools and strategies to help you create the life you want. I want to thank you for listening. And if you are new to the show, welcome. It's so exciting to have you here, especially today. Today's show is for all of us who live in families. We have relationships, we have significant others, we have children. Today's show is about difficult family dynamics. I'm so excited that my guest is here today to give us some strategies and tools on how to navigate difficult family challenges as well as the chaos that families bring. I'm excited to introduce my guest, Eric Maisel, a retired family therapist, an active life coach, and the author of more than 50 books, including his latest, Overcoming Your Difficult Family. He has been quoted or featured in a variety of publications, including Martha Stewart Living, Redbook, Glamour, Men's Health, the San Francisco Chronicle, and Self. He lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. Eric Maisel, I'm so excited that you're here.
Great to be with you today. I'll try not to be too difficult like difficult families. I'll try to be easy.
You'll try to be easy. But we really get a lot of practice with difficult people right in our own family. So it's just so awesome to just have you here to talk about the subject. I was reminded, and I giggled before you came on, I was reminded of a quote by one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Ram Dass. He says that if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. So with that said, Eric, why are family dynamics so hard?
Well, there are a ton of reasons. Let's just pick one. We know that the divorce rate is 50% or higher. And interestingly enough, the divorce rate for second marriages and third marriages is even higher. So that means that in many families, at least half the families, the primary figures in the family are not doing very well. So naturally, everybody else in the family won't be doing very well either. So just that one dynamic, the difficulty of two people living together, the husband and wife or husband and husband or wife and wife, the difficulty of them living together permeates the relationship. Then this thing we call sibling rivalry is very real. I've been surprised by how difficult sibling relationships are and how many siblings are on the outs with each other and really furious with each other and sometimes break for all times. And then there's the difficulties in parenting. Parenting is not at all easy. So there are those difficulties between parent and child. And then there's the middle generation piece where adults in the middle have to deal with their aging parents and their kids. So we could run through a whole list of why family dynamics are so difficult. I think the main reason is that people are difficult.
We all bring our personalities or whatever we have to the table, right? At the same time.
I'm currently working on a book about authoritarian wounding, that is growing up in a family with an authoritarian and how wounding that is. And research indicates that maybe as many as 25% of the general population are either authoritarian leaders or authoritarian followers. And by that, I mean that they have a bullying style that in some ways they're just plain mean. There are a lot of just plain mean people out there. And so that may be the major truth about why families are so difficult, is that a lot of people are just plain difficult.
Wow, that's so interesting that you say that. So, do you feel that our culture, our society sends out a message that authoritarian is needed, that you need to suffer or you need to pay a price for anything that's worth having?
I'm not sure if it sends out that message exactly. I think the main message it sends out is that no one's responsible for anything. And by that I mean I'm an advocate in the what's called critical psychology field, that where we believe that the current way that mental disorders are diagnosed is not legitimate, especially the diagnoses for kids. And the way that all works is that if you squirm in school or if you say no too many times, you get a mental disorder diagnosis. And what that allows is for parents to get off the hook and not take responsibility for their parenting skills. They can say, oh, my kid has this or my kid has that. I'm not doing anything wrong. Nobody's doing anything wrong. My kid somehow caught this mental disorder flu somewhere and now is oppositional or hyperactive or something. I think that's the main message, is that folks are not required to take responsibility for their actions. That's why authoritarians can get away with what they're doing. That's why so many things are permitted in our society, because folks are not held personally responsible.
So, in the work that you do, how are you working to turn that around?
In many different ways. I write books on the subject. I've written books called The Future of Mental Health and Humane Helping, and many other books in that area. I work as the editor for parent resources at a big website called Mad in America, where I try to supply parents with alternative resources to the main chemical fix resource that parents are now provided with for their kids. As you may or may not know, younger and younger kids are being put on more and more so-called psychiatric medication for so-called mental disorders. So I try to help parents understand that that isn't the only way to deal with a child's emotional distress, is by feeding them chemicals that, by the way, are pathways to addiction. We talk about this opioid addiction, and we give kids opioids as mental disorder treatment and then wonder why they get addicted to opioids when we're feeding them opioids as medication. So there's a whole big story to tell there. But the main work I'm doing is trying to help educate parents that they have to take responsibility for their parenting and that they shouldn't be too quick to supply a mental disorder diagnosis for their kids, that the problems their kids are expressing are probably family problems, not broken plumbing problems.
So you say that we all are difficult, which keeps the difficulty and the chaos in families. How can you survive or even thrive in a difficult family?
There are many different kinds of answers. I have an authoritarian wound questionnaire that many people have been taking. And one of the questions I ask is, what's helped the most? And the almost universal answer is getting the heck out of there.
Yep. I remember saying that myself when I was young.
Yeah. So as a kid, you can't get the heck out of there. But as an adult, that may be the thing that helps you survive the best, is reducing your contact with difficult family members. That doesn't feel good. We can feel guilty about that. We can feel loss about that. But that may be the way that we have to protect ourselves, is by putting 2,000 miles between us, or having that terrible Thanksgiving be the only time that we meet the family, or what have you. Distance can be the best helper there. Then, if you're stuck within the family still, or if you're meaning to maintain relationships still, then there are skills that you can teach yourself about being strong and clear and communicating well and making sure that you're safe and keeping boundaries, etc. I have all of those skills enumerated in my book, Overcoming Your Difficult Family. So if folks want to learn about those skills, they can learn them there. But the two headlines are, there are skills to learn, but even with those skills, difficult people remain difficult, and we may have to just get out of their way and maintain our distance.
Yeah, and I hear you when you say get out of their way and maintain their distance, but I also, and just in my human experience, I know so many people who I haven't talked to my brother in 7 years. I haven't talked to my mom, my sister in 20 years. So yeah, I hear you when you say the distance is good, but what if you really want to prepare that relationship?
There are some things to try. You can't control it. Got to put a big underline there. You can't control other people. Can't be done. But you can influence situations. It's good to get that distinction in mind between control and influence. So what could be a little influential? Well, one important thing is to not have the same conversations in the same place. If you're always having that same unfortunate fight around the dinner table or what have you, make an actual date to go out with the person that you're trying to reconcile with to some other location. Maybe it's a favorite picnic spot or a special restaurant or this or that, whatever it might be. Just by changing the location, you kind of add a ceremonial solemnity to the occasion, and the other person may go to a new place in the relationship just by virtue of the two of you being in some new place. So that's by way of saying there are tactics, there are things to try, and they're worth trying. As you say, it doesn't feel good to just break the relationship. We may have to, but it doesn't feel good. So if your goal is to try to repair the relationship, there are things to try like that. Things as simple as just having the same old conversation in a new place.
And even in that conversation, if the same conversation comes up that made you break apart in the first place, does everybody just take responsibility for their part, or how do you facilitate? How does one facilitate a difficult conversation if you haven't seen your family member or spouse or whomever, in a while, or you just broke?
The main tactic is to be brief.
Oh.
Because our communication style usually is geared to letting the other person off the hook. So we'll say 163 words, 73 of which are kind of apologies and changes in direction and what have you. I recommend for my coaching clients that when they're having an important conversation that they say sentences in 7 sentences or 7 words or fewer.
Oh.
And that might sound like that's not okay. In other words, you want to be clear and you don't want to give the other person an opportunity to latch on to some other words in your sentence and go in some other direction. It's very powerful to say things in that much brevity. And most people find it very difficult to do that. It isn't their style. They're not trained. And it just feels too powerful. It actually feels too powerful and somehow dangerous to say things in just 7 words or fewer. So the headline there is, if you're going to try to have some reconciliation with someone and you know what the subject matter is, it's time to try to say your part of it in a new way. Second strategy is to role play and rehearse in your own mind, because we're so familiar with the arguments that the other person is going to throw at us that it's actually very easy to have the whole conversation in our own mind between the two of us, have our part and the other person's part and our part and the other person's part. And so prepare ourselves for their usual arguments and really get ready. Instead of having that experience where I wish I had said this, now actually know what you're going to say when they bring up A or when they bring up B or when they bring up C. Be prepared as to what you're going to say in response to those things. So between speaking more clearly and succinctly and actually having your answers rehearsed, both of those things can help a lot.
Oh, wow. That sounds awesome. In my younger experience, I can remember just blaming that person for everything they did to me. And, it was never I, it was you did all these horrible things to me. And this is why I'm upset. I never, took responsibility, when I was younger. And that argument or whatever that family situation was, it just perpetuated, and it goes on for years and years. So
I was going to say, the person may be, blameworthy, but what we have to really look out for are our own behaviors and actions. And what I see a lot in my authoritarian wounding research is how often the victim of authoritarian wounding will then go ahead and marry another authoritarian or parent her own kids in an authoritarian way. So there was nothing do about having an authoritarian parent, but there are things you can do about your relationship with your mate and especially your relationship with your children. That's where you have to take responsibility. It may be fine to blame the parent because maybe they were just blameworthy, but you may be to blame also now in your relationships with your mate and with your children, and there you have to take care.
Take care and take responsibility for your behavior because, they did what they did at the time. Is that correct? And
That's right.
now we have to take responsibility. This is certainly very, very helpful advice because I can think of many families. I'm trying to think of one where difficulty in families is a real thing. I remember my daughter asking me when she was young one time, "Mom, why is it harder to get along with family members?" And I remember telling her, well, it's because we don't pick our family members.
That's exactly right. And for a lot of people, we have to create a new family. And as I said before, it doesn't feel good to divorce one's family or to not have contact with one's family. But even if you're maintaining contact, it's still very wise to pick people of the sort that you want to be acquainted with, to pick people, like-minded people, to pick people with the same values. This is going to be a side. I'm going to say something that's sort of coming from left field here, but just came up in an interview I did earlier today about religion and what have you, and people leaving their church because they no longer believe. For a lot of people, their church was particularly authoritarian. They maybe didn't realize it. As a kid, what do you know? But in retrospect, you may realize that you grew up in one of those really strict churches, and the church itself was authoritarian, and you decided you had to leave it. Well, that's often very painful. That was your family. That was your community. You loved those, dinners and thises and that's. And so it can be very, even though you have to leave that particular church because it was harsh or mean, you may still feel a great loss there. And then you have to find the next place where there is community for you. You don't want to be just out there alone, feeling lonely and estranged. You need to find the next community that's going to fulfill your relationship and community needs. So that's a long-winded way of saying, if you do decide to divorce your family, or even if you're still in contact with your family, you want to make sure that you're maintaining good relationships elsewhere so that you don't feel too cold and isolated and lonely.
Oh, I like that. So even if it's your mother or your father or sister or brother, and I think, and I'm just speaking what I've experienced or heard is, do you feel some people hold on to those relationships no matter how horrible and crappy they are is because this is my mother, this is my father, this is my brother, something inside of me that says that I have to be in this no matter what. Do some people feel that way?
Absolutely. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. One is the obvious reason that this is your mother, this is your father, but there's a more complicated reason, and that is that when we talk about somebody being difficult, they're often not difficult all the time. For instance, with authoritarian parents, often they're very charming sometimes, especially with other people. Authoritarian personality types are often very good in the world because they know there are lots of people they can't bully or ought not to bully. It's not safe to bully. So they can be very charming in the world. And so sometimes children see this charming parent, not charming to them, but this parent who's charming in many situations, and they kind of fall in love with that charming parent because that person looks really good. And then behind closed doors, that parent is often very cruel and very punishing. So the child is confused and has two different feelings about that one and the same individual, namely that that person is wonderful and horrible. And so it's hard to break with that person because part of you is remembering very clearly the wonderful part of that person. So as you can tell, it's really very complicated. It isn't that difficult people are just completely difficult every second of the day. It's much more nuanced and complicated than that.
Okay. Wow. I mean, this is really huge because I can really think about my own family experiences. I mean, everybody that I grew up with in terms of family. There's a few people that I have not chose to be in relationship with as I've gotten older, but one can really feel, or I felt many years ago, that I have to be in this relationship because this is, this person is my mom or my dad or my cousin. I love this person. So what I hear you saying is you can love that person, but in order to have inner peace,
that's right,
and a high quality life, you have to make some changes.
That's right. And you want to do it without feeling guilty. It's really important. If you're going to separate from someone for your own safety, and safety is paramount. And it's not just, physical safety. It's all kinds of senses of safety. If you're going to separate from someone in order to feel safe, you want to do that without also feeling guilty. And that's easier said than done. But that is something to remind oneself about. That is, that there's no reason to feel guilty about separating from someone if you must do it in order to remain safe.
Is part of that thinking, and I'm just trying to understand, when you feel like you have to stay in the relationship, is that part of kind of taking responsibility for that person, somewhere in there, taking more responsibility for who that person is and where their shortcomings are? It's like, part of me might feel sorry for that person.
Sure. And we're also forgetful. We forget how much it hurt. In a way, I think evolution set us up to not remember pain for our own sake so that we're not always in pain. So we can, pretty easily forget how difficult that person was. And then the next time we see him, we remember again why we felt they were so difficult. But we can just forget and so try again. I think there are lots of reasons why we want to maintain those relationships, even if they aren't quite working for us. I think another reason is that if we were harmed by difficult family members, that probably means we also got a little weakened, and it may be hard for us to stand up on our own 2 feet. And so that may be a reason that we're maintaining the relationship, is that we're not quite strong enough to make the break. And so it may be that we need to manifest our strength in order to make that break.
Eric, I really want to thank you for your insightful advice on how to just maintain relationships in difficult families and know when to get out or distance yourself in love and not feel guilty about it. Thank you so much for being here. And I feel that the listeners will definitely learn how to have a better life just by lessening some of the difficult family dynamics in their lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
To learn more about Eric Maisel, his website information will be listed in the show notes of this podcast. If you found something of value from this episode of Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, I want you to share it with someone. Also, I want you to let us know the topics you would like to hear more about. Your feedback helps us to bring the best health and wellness conversations and topics that will support you in your busy life. Thank you for listening. Get my new book, Jumpstart Your Life, Find Your Motivation, and Change Your Life One Step at a Time. This book has been released on Amazon.com and other online retailers. This book was inspired by my successful and life-changing workshops that I've been leading for over 10 years. I am now bringing my tools, techniques, and accountability structures straight to you. So if you're ready to take that first step towards the life you've always wanted, get the book and discover your capacity for success and attain your goals through a series of simple, powerful techniques. I also want you to join my private Facebook community called Jumpstart Your Life. Get resources, tips, as well as ideas as you integrate the Jumpstart Your Life process. I'll see you in the community.
Thank you for listening to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. This podcast is sponsored by DianeRandallConsults.com. If you like this show, the best way to support it is by leaving 5-star feedback on iTunes. And please feel free to email your questions, comments, and suggestions to feedback@DianeRandallConsults.com. Until next week, namaste.